And so, to be here, resting in the not knowing anything, not knowing anything, just simply being. There is a naturalness in being that doesn't know. What a relief to just let go and not know, to let go of all of the tension of efforting and trying to hold it all together, trying to get somewhere, trying to get it without knowing what it is and not realizing that it's already here. Just to let go and to not know, just to be here, just like this, just to be here, to be so fully present that you're not listening to the mind and all its ideas of what it thinks is supposed to happen in this moment, in this meeting, in any moment. That there can be such a depth of presence that all of the ideas that the mind has about what this is, how it needs to be, how you need to try harder, can just be fully let go of. Because in all of those ideas, there is no celebration, there is no freedom, there is no joy, there is no victory. The victory is underneath all of those ideas and concepts. Everything that has been gathered, even everything that has been gathered from spiritual traditions. Let it all go. Let it all go, because as soon as your mind conceptualizes anything, it's not true anymore. Truth is fresh. Truth is ever present. Truth is here now. You cannot work towards it. You cannot understand it. You cannot make it a goal or a spiritual ambition. It is to let go of everything that the mind thinks it knows about the self, about awakening, about enlightenment. Let go of all of those myths, because they do not bring one to freedom. Because freedom is already here underneath all of that heavy baggage that the mind is lugging around, thinking that it understands what this journey is about. Underneath all of that burdensome conceptual nonsense, there is a freedom right here, and you are already that freedom. You are already free and clear and open, and it is just to be so present here now that the recognition, the remembering of the shining glory of your true nature can be remembered in the presence of now. You do not come and go. You do not get it and lose it. You always are it. It's just that sometimes the mind comes in with its concepts and ideas, and attention goes towards those ideas and contemplates believing those ideas. It is all a distraction. All ideas are a distraction. Anything that involves the mind, we could even say that anything that even pleases the mind is just a spiritual experience. We don't want spiritual experiences to be layering up, because then we create more concepts about wanting that spiritual experience again, right? It's to let go of all spiritual experience. Let go of everything that the mind thinks that it knows, everything that has been gathered, because all of that stuff is just an obscuration. It's just mud on the windscreen, right? There cannot be clear seeing when there is mud on the windscreen. But do not waste time trying to clear it off, right? Because where that mud comes from, there's more, right? And you can spend all this time trying to clear the mud off, only to find that you drive through another spiritual puddle and gather a whole load more flicky mud on the windscreen. So just let go of all of those ideas about trying to make yourself ready, good enough, work hard enough. That's all part of the mind's delusion. It is to be here so present, in such a depth of presence that the mind's ideas are not dominant in any way. Because as long as the mind's ideas are dominant, then you are not fully present. Full presence is just the felt sense of being here. Just being here. The felt sense I am, the felt sense of just being, the felt sense of your own presence, just present to your own presence. Only true presence can be present to its own presence. And so in this moment, just to let go of being someone that wants something, someone that is trying to get something or get somewhere. Let go of trying and efforting and ideas and beliefs and concepts, and just feel your own presence, actually simply being here. You do not have to understand the words that are coming, but the words are pointing to what is already here. The words are not pointing to something that you have to understand. They're not pointing to something that you are going to be examined on. They are not pointing to something that the mind can even fathom, because what is being pointed to is that which is ever present, the ever-present presence of now, that which never moves and changes, that which has never ever moved and changed. So we are not selling more concepts, we're not selling future ideas of glorious experiences that you can tell your friends about. None of that. This is just about being yourself. It's so simple. There's nothing that is needed to be yourself, except a longing to be yourself, a longing that is deep enough that there is a willingness to be here, a longing deep enough to know yourself, that is just an aliveness in the heart. This aliveness that is the longing, it's already halfway here. And just to feel the longing in the heart, to know yourself, to be one with God, to be one with the Divine Mother, to be one with divinity wholeness is enough. It's more than enough. It is everything. Because where you feel the longing, what you find is that the longing that is alive in your heart is actually that divine, in a way longing for you, longing to experience itself in you, as you. When you come to feel the felt sense of presence, what's really happening is that God is experiencing God and obliterating that felt sense of being someone. When you feel the divine, it is the divine experiencing the divine. It is not you experiencing the divine. You are utterly absent, or we could say what you have thought you are is utterly absent, and just the divine is experiencing the divine in a moment of revelation. What could cause the divine to resist itself? What could cause God to resist God? What a mystery. What a mystery it is that there is only the divine, only God, and yet somehow God is resisting God. What's that about? The truth is that God is not really resisting God. God is just God. The divine is just divinely whole, shining, radiant, and never away from itself. The only thing that is obscuring this truth is the thought, your thought, that you are not that. So you are a thought away from remembering, and you cannot remove that thought by thinking another thought, a better thought, a more holy thought. You cannot remove that thought that you are not by holding on to all kinds of ideas and concepts about what you might be or how you might get there. It is just to be so present that that one thought that keeps you from yourself is obliterated by the light of your own presence, obliterated by the light of your own direct experience of yourself, that you come to recognize indirect experience and not resist yourself, that you are already here. And you do not have to know how to guard this or keep this for the future, because the future itself is just a thought and does not exist in reality. So you do not need to know how to live this. You do not need to know how to keep this fresh, alive, awake being as your own, because you belong to it. You are not what you think you are. And all ideas about how to are of the mind. All that needs to be known is the direct recognition of your own presence. And this is all that is ever needed, is to know the felt sense of your own presence, to know the felt sense of what you are without a thought in this moment, to feel the alive awakeness of your own presence without needing to understand, such a letting go that in this moment you are utterly free, that the direct experience of this moment is as good as it gets, because this moment is fresh and awake. This moment is a fresh, awake knowing of yourself. You have never been anything other than this fresh, awake moment. And really, it's about how much armor are you wearing in this moment that keeps you from yourself? How many thoughts are you believing in that keeps you separate from yourself? How many concepts are you invested in that keep you from being here in the direct experience of yourself? You see, you are already here, and you are already whole, and you are already divine, and you are already shining, and you are already love, and you are already full. What keeps you from knowing this is the belief that you are not, or the belief that you're on a journey, or the belief that you're on a path, or the belief that you're not worthy or ready, or the belief that you are going to find this during some kind of practice or meditation, and that it's not here right now in this moment. So it is to give it all up, give it all up, fall so deeply into your disappointment and disillusionment with everything that you've ever tried to bring you to freedom. Collapse in disappointment, collapse in the hopelessness of all of your efforting, collapse into this moment so fully present and disappointed and hopeless with all of that trying, that you just let go and find, oh, it's so very simple. It's all just here, just here. The peace, the simple peace of being is right here. Now, what you can be sure of is the mind is ready. The me is ready to jump right back in again, to start up the engine of separation in any given moment. And as soon as you nourish that engine that's revving up, ready to move into another journey of me, as soon as the attention goes towards that possibility, the robber is robbing you. And so it's just to be here so present and aware. And to be aware, keep your eye, your true eye of aware being, on the thief, on the robber, right? As long as you're watching that robber can't rob you of your freedom. So keep your eye, your aware eye of being upon the mind, upon the moving, changing. But do not fall into identification and believe the stories that the mind wants to sell you. Not one of them, not a single one. Believe only what you can directly experience. And of course, direct experience itself is not a belief because it's not a thought. But to be here now, believe this moment fresh, and rely only upon the direct experience of being here. Rely only upon the aliveness of this moment. Rely only upon your own presence and the direct recognition in the felt sense of your own presence that you are still, silent, awake, openness, that you are here, you have already arrived. So much time spent thinking, have I got it? Have I not got it? Have I had an awakening experience? Have I not? Am I awake? Am I not awake? That one is not awake. That one that thinks about it is not awake. Awakeness is here. Awakeness is awake to itself. The one that is thinking is not the awake field. So all of that thinking, all of that wondering, the answer is no. Always. Because if the thinking is happening, then that's not the awakeness. Could have had an awakening experience, but if you're thinking about it, then you're not it. The experience comes and goes. What remains? What never changes? What has that experience left you with? What is true? What has never left? What have you noticed about yourself that doesn't change? What in this moment never leaves? What in this moment is always the same? The awakeness is always awake, and you are that awakeness. It is just to be awake to the awakeness, be open to the openness, and let go of the concepts that tell you otherwise. There is nothing to learn, nothing to understand. It is just to be here and to be awake in your own presence. Everything is right here. The awake field is an intelligent field, and it already knows. So to be awake to the intelligence of your own natural self, your own natural consciousness, is to be awake to that which knows. Just to be here, where you can feel the resonance of what is being spoken. You see, the pointing is pointing to what you already are. The pointing is not pointing to more practices. The pointing is not pointing to how many hours have you spent meditating. The pointing is not pointing to how many hours have you spent standing on your head. How many hours have you spent chanting? The pointing is not pointing to any kind of achievement of spiritual practice. The pointing is not pointing to the world. The pointing is pointing to the silence. The pointing is pointing to the silence of being that is always here. The pointing is not pointing to anything that is moving and changing. The pointing is pointing only to yourself. It is not pointing to any ideas of anything that you have to do in order to. The pointing is pointing directly to this moment, so fully charged with awakeness. The pointing is pointing to now, this moment, fresh and awake and full of the knowing of itself. Now, where there is the capacity to come to presence is just to be here, so fully being. Just to be yourself. Just to be yourself. Now we have plenty of time for talking about how things are unfolding and how this divine presence of your natural being is being noticed, permeating the life in every moment. There's time to speak about what is being noticed, how the life changes and opens, and there's more fullness and things shift. But essentially, so much of that doesn't really matter, but we speak about it to support the ever deepening resting in this truth. What is really important is being the being. Now, because of our habits to follow the thinking and the mind, we are habitually pulled away. So we speak about how to keep coming to the moment. We keep pointing to the moment in a myriad of ways so that the recognition can dawn. Oh, it's just about the moment. Oh, it's just about the silence. It's just about being here. Yes, yes. The dawning is the recognition. Oh, I've heard this so many times, but right now in this moment, it's landing deeper. There's an alive resonance that recognizes. Hallelujah. Let the recognition, the deepening, the rooting, bring an aliveness, which is a deepening recognition of your own being. Now, your own being, it requires the recognition of your own consciousness. Your own consciousness is the aliveness in the presence of this moment. Now, when you can recognize the aliveness of the moment, the aliveness of the presence, you're recognizing your own consciousness. But what is recognizing is not the mind. It's consciousness recognizing itself as an aliveness, as an alive resonance, as a frequency or a vibration. Now, once you come to be able to recognize the frequency, the vibration, the alive resonance of presence, then this is where you want to rest. Because this is where the refinement happens. We could say, in truth, the whole process that gets called awakening is actually recognizing finer and finer frequencies of your own consciousness. It's actually opening to finer and finer frequencies of your own nervous system. It's being able to recognize in the subtlety of subtle perception, in the field of intelligence, it's being able to actually recognize the resonance, the frequency, the vibration. So we're using different words here because different words can create that remembering of the resonance. You're not awakening to anything in the world. You're awakening to discover that what you are is pure consciousness. You're awakening to discover that what you are is really as pure consciousness, that you're your nervous system, right? And as you open to recognize that you're pure consciousness, which is the fine frequency, that the fine frequency is creating an appearance. It's resonating and creating an appearance. And really, this whole process of awakening is about coming to recognize the frequency deeply enough that you're not concerned with the appearance anymore, that you're only concerned with the frequency, right? Because when you're only concerned with the frequency, you're concerned with the inner recognition of your own divinity. You found God, you found the light inside you when you can recognize the finer frequencies. And really, the appearance is just constantly pointing you back to the frequency. Now, if the frequency is a resistance or a trigger or a charge in the nervous system, the appearance of life is pointing you to meet the frequency in your nervous system that is a limiting pattern. So you meet the limitation, the pattern of limitation, and then you open to finer frequencies, again, finer and finer. If the appearance creates something that brings you to separation and limitation, you meet your nervous system, you meet the felt sense, the sensations, the frequency of limitation until it clears, and then you are open to finer frequencies. So the way to God, the way to the divine, is to keep opening to finer and finer frequencies. This is consciousness opening to finer frequencies of itself through its patterns of limitation, through its patternings, all of the ways that consciousness can pattern itself to discover its purity. Once you've discovered the purity of consciousness, you know the alive resonance of the being, the purity, and then the field that you're responsible for in your human life will be refined, and you'll be responsible for transmuting certain patterns of conditioning and limitation, which look like your life. You think it's your life, and you think it's your story, but it's just a divine assignment to transmute a whole load of patterns of limitation on behalf of the whole, for the collective, to free the collective. So it has nothing to do with what you think it's all about. And if you get focused in me and my story, you're being entangled in the patterning. Now that's okay, because it can't be any other way. You're going to be entangled in the patterning until the recognition of the resonance of your nervous system can be recognized finely enough that the recognition is, oh, this is all about the aliveness. This is all about the frequency. This is all about the resonance. This is all about the nervous system. However we recognize it, it's all about consciousness coming to know its purity. So the appearance does not ever matter. There are storylines that are very compelling, right? They're ones that really, they pull us in. Oh, they tug the heartstrings. They take us on a dance because we can be so entangled, particularly in relationships, family, loved ones, right? Those kind of things. They can really pull us into a loop. But when we come to say, it's not about the appearance, it's just about the frequency. And if the frequency is a big charge, then meet that charge. Meet that charge. Meet your nervous system. Come into such an intimacy with your nervous system that you stop making it about the story and you realize that this is just about you knowing yourself. And the self is not a self that so much of the world imagines that they've woken up, right? But there they are, telling their stories, talking about it. They don't know what they're talking about, right? They've had the odd little flash of something a little bit greater than the human condition. And there's a whole delusion around awakening. It's not about the worldly story. It's not about the worldly experience. And yet, there is a lived, embodied experience, but it's not about a me living a life in the way that we think it is, but there is a lived life, and it's an extraordinary adventure. It's an extraordinary adventure. So we're speaking about something that is not so commonly spoken about, but it's not about understanding it with your mind or making comparisons. It's about, if you feel the resonance, you feel the resonance in consciousness. You feel the resonance in your nervous system. And where you feel the resonance, the resonance is truth. The resonance of truth, of recognition, is peace. It's peace. It's freedom. And this is essentially what we're longing for. So let's stay resting in the peace, in the truth. Let's not try to give it a story and take it back to the surface, come back heroic about telling the story of my awakening. Let's just rest here in the vibrant peace and glorious freedom. And let's really get intimate with who you are. Let's get intimate with your nervous system, with your own consciousness, right? This is why Ramana would say there's only the self and wouldn't engage in the story, because he's just super intimate, super intimate with the resonance of the divine. And there's a knowing. So we don't want to mirror how we perceive a worldly experience of a saint or a sage. We want to get into the groove. Let's get into the saintly, sagely groove. We get into the groove, the divine groove, by opening to the aliveness, right? And out of the rutted groove of conditioning and patterned consciousness, we come into the resonance. And that's why every teaching, every sharing that creates a resonance in us is because it's resonating at a frequency of truth, where the nervous system is coming alive with a finer frequency. But what happens is we notice the finer frequency and we say, oh, I need to read every book. written by that one. Now I need to read every single book, right? Because the mind thinks more, more, more. But actually the awake frequency is where it is, right? Saints and sages didn't publish books, like true ones didn't publish books and books and books. It's their devotees that publish the books, right? It's about the resonance. It's about the resonance. It's about being here now and coming to recognize the resonance so that you come to an intimacy with your own consciousness, an intimacy with your own nervous system, right? There's nothing wrong with books that bring you into the frequency, but don't get lost on that track that bookish knowledge is going to bring you to this freedom, because it's not. You are the one. You are that one. And when in the presence of a divine resonance, a presence of divine resonance, whether it's from a book or listening or seeing a photograph of a being like a darshan, right? It doesn't matter, but it's to recognize that what happens is the fine frequency comes alive. It's recognized. The mind says it's because of that thing out there. The truth is, it's because your nervous system, your consciousness, is recognizing a finer frequency of itself. So when you recognize the finer frequency of itself, don't follow the mind that says, oh, now I need to read every book. Fall into the frequency. Fall into the frequency. Open to, be so curious. What is this aliveness? What is this sense of openness? Why is there a draw to this? Why does it feel so good? Notice that there's an aliveness. The aliveness is actually the recognition. It's consciousness, conscious of itself. So it's consciousness being conscious, right? And that's a knowing. It's the knowing in the true heart that's remembering a frequency of the primordial essential truth, your essence nature, your feeling. It's like that you've never experienced electricity before, or hydro, right? Whatever you call that. It's like you've never experienced it. You're like living before hydro. And like whatever creates that electric charge, you just feel like a charge, or you see a spark and you feel like, wow, right? That's what's happening in your consciousness, is that you're experiencing something really primordial, like a primordial spark, a light, a remembering. And it's in the mind, it's like, oh, what's that? What's that? But it's not about going out. It's about going into it. Because when you go into it, you're creating more of a charge. You're creating more of it. So where consciousness is recognizing itself and is in its knowing, and there's an aliveness, be with the aliveness, because being with the aliveness nourishes the aliveness. It enlivens the aliveness. It enlivens the presence. And the presence is the presence of being. So just to notice, as these words are coming, there's an enlivening. Where you feel the alivening, the recognition, to recognize where there's like a yes, but it's not out there. It's your nervous system that's tingling, shimmering, alive. So you come to a familiarity with your nervous system. So yes, it takes a lot to stay present with the aliveness of the nervous system and really nourish the alive felt sense of presence. It takes a lot because the life has habitually said, think about it, do something with it, write something down, tell someone, make a recording, right? Right? The learned habit is move to the mind. And so it can be hard to stay present. So as we're speaking this, just to recognize how the mechanism works. So then we go towards the denser consciousness because we're trying to capture or think about or understand that alive resonance. And then we say, oh, I've lost it. It's gone. It's gone. It's not here anymore. Why is it not here? It's because you're in the kitchen and you're thinking about it and you're making dinner and you got the TV on or the radio on and you're in the thought, oh, I had this great experience, but it's gone now. It's gone now. When I was in satsang, it was like right here. And now it's gone. It's gone because your attention has wandered. It hasn't gone. Your nervous system, your consciousness, it still is alive and present with itself. So this is what happens. Now, this is where sadhana is really precious. Sadhana is precious because it trains us to be able to stay present. It trains us to hold a presence, so a sitting practice, a meditation practice, it trains us to stay present. So we learn to stay present and we move through what is needed. So things like moving body movement practices, they support us to really be able to stay present, to be still and present. So we come to depths of presence where we can stay focused, where we can actually really drop into the transcendent field. When we drop into the transcendent field is the silence, the stillness. Now, as we drop into the transcendent field, where we disappear into the transcendent field, it gets called samadhi. We open to the true nature. We can only, of course, open to the true nature into like a samadhi where there's been a certain training to stay present. But here's the catch. It also can suddenly consciousness can just drop into a flash of itself spontaneously, where there hasn't necessarily been those kind of trainings. So we don't want to hold ideas that you have to follow certain paths. And when you have accumulated this many hours of practice, then you're ready. It's not true, but you will find that the more that you can be open and stay present, when you open to yourself, when you open to your own consciousness, your own nervous system, there's more of an ability to recognize and stay present here. So the training has a benefit. It's just to know that you don't find yourself while you're training, right? The Buddha opened to the Buddha nature when the Buddha opened the eyes after the sitting, right? This is what we want to be very aware of, is that We can rest and sit and come into the transcendent in a sitting practice. We want to be very aware of being the meditator that's meditating and then stopping meditating, because that's someone with a practice that can be attached to, and it's got nothing to do with being the being. It's the recognition that the being is here. So to let the sitting practice be, drop into the being and just be here. Just be here. Just be. Just be. Just be. The moment that really we want to have such an awake awareness is the moment where the eyes open. The moment of possible transition. It's to recognize that the being is here with eyes open. Whatever the moment is, that when any sense of practice is finished, notice that the being hasn't finished, that the being is here. And the aliveness of the being is the aliveness of the nervous system. So the training is beautiful, but we want to be very clear that the being doesn't start and stop. That's the mind's idea, is that there's a starting and a stopping. The being is always the being, right? And when we sit, it's to notice the being, that we're dropping maybe deeper into the felt sense of being. But the purpose of dropping deeper into the being isn't to create a practice that becomes a mental idea or a crutch. It's to enjoy being together. It's to enjoy being the being, to feel the grace of meeting in the being. It's very, very beautiful, right? You feel the grace of being the being. But at the moment that you are ready to open the eyes or leave the seat, notice that the being, the aliveness of being, is still here. And the being accompanies you to the kitchen, right? The being accompanies you wherever you move, that the aliveness of being is still right here. Now, these are some important noticings about how the mind can have ideas about what this is all about, but it's not true. Those are concepts, those are ideas. And so we want to be very, very clear that the being is always being. Be together, revel in being together, but don't imagine that you're only the being when you're sitting in a certain chair or at a certain time of day, right? It's so important in living this. What sometimes gets called the embodiment of this is to know that your alive nervous system is always with you. Now, that's why we would say that when a trigger or a charge in life comes in, the mind says, oh, I left the being and a big charge came in. No, your nervous system and the big charge. Here's the opportunity. You're on, right? Here's the aliveness. This is it. This is life living itself. This is what it's all about. It's about this moment, this precious moment. You haven't lost it. You haven't left it. Nothing bad is happening. This is the grace. Your nervous system is right here, fully charged, fully triggered, fully alive. You're burning away some patterning so you can know yourself more deeply, right? It's not like, oh, everything's really hard. I just need to get to my cushion. I just need to get to my sitting practice. No. Sure, sit down. but feel the charge. Don't try to get away from the grace. You cannot run from grace, right? If you run from grace, you're running from yourself. You're running from your own awakeness, right? So nothing is outside of this wholeness. So here now, the being is just being. The stillness, the silence, the aware, awake field where freedom is always free is right here. We notice first, generally, the peace here, the deep, still peace of presence. We notice usually first like a calmness, a serenity, and it's so nourishing, and it's always here. It's in the alive presence where you have the felt sense of presence. Now, as we deepen and open, or it can come in flashes, the sense here is of a happiness, of a contentedness, a joyfulness. It's not even so much about the exuberance and rapturous, blissful ecstaticness that can start to unfold. It's really about the deep peace. Now, as we start to open and release tensions, like really deeply held tensions, the contrast can bring rushes of pure consciousness that are so alive and Shakti filled and nourishing that we can have very like alive, blissful experiences or joyful, exuberant, rapturous, ecstatic experiences. Or we can feel like love. I love you. I love everyone. I love. Right? As the tension of holding on, of separation, and the tightness of the me and the mind and the patterning starts to let go, the surges of true nature can come in and can bring a lot of light and aliveness. And this is so beautiful. But you know, there's even a point where all of this generally settles out. It's really about the deep sense of peace and freedom and being able to be present with your nervous system, whatever is happening, whether it's exuberant, ecstatic, blissful, whether it feels just peaceful or a contentment, whether it feels joyful. It doesn't really matter. It's about being so intimate and present with your own nervous system that you come to know yourself. Now, what is knowing itself? It's consciousness knowing itself. And you start to notice that all experience is only known in your nervous system. It's only known in the felt sense. Everything. The mind is very quick to say, label things, talk about, give a narrative. But the truth is that before the narrative that we have instinctually and habitually learned to jump to, before that, the knowing, everything is only known in the presence of now, in your nervous system. You only really know it as sensation. So the more that we can come to be familiar with sensation, the more we can feel, we can open to feel. Now we're speaking of the felt sense of presence. Now the felt sense of presence and the aliveness of presence is very different to the feeling of anger or stress or sadness, right? On a certain level, it's very different. And yet, so we're habituated to recognize certain the feelings of certain emotions, and get very involved in the emotionality of it, the story and the upset of it. Now, the alive presence is different because it's a finer frequency, right? It's a much finer frequency than those more emotional resonances, because those emotions are also frequencies, but they're denser frequencies. So when we come to recognize the aliveness of presence, we're opening to a finer frequency of a pure consciousness. Now, when we open to the frequency of pure consciousness, then when one of those denser feelings comes in, like anger suddenly comes in, when we can open to anger coming in at a finer frequency, it's like we can experience anger in a bigger space, right? We'll use anger as an example. Anger comes, and instead of just reaction, just the fury or whatever happening, because we're open to a bigger space of pure consciousness, instead of the pattern just looping, the pattern opens into a bigger space, and still some reaction or something might happen, but there's more space to feel actually the sensation and the frequency in a bigger space, right? So as we open more to the being, we have more capacity to be with the trials and tribulations that can arise as sensation, because we start to notice, oh, I can just move this through in the nervous system, and the old pattern that says, you said this, and no, I will not, right? And just reacts in whichever way anger might have reacted before. The spaciousness can feel the frequency, and the pattern doesn't loop. The pattern opens in more spaciousness. And this is why, as we open, we start to notice naturally that our way of experiencing emotionality starts to shift. But also, the glory is in our presence, we can consciously bring awareness to our habitual ways of reacting and projecting and being triggered. And we can bring more awareness to actually open to feel and experience it differently, right? So this is the beauty as we open to recognize our own consciousness and to recognize all experience is only known in awareness. And then we really notice all experience is only really known in the aliveness of the nervous system, right? So first of all, we recognize it's only known in awareness, because awareness is aware of it. And then as we open to the aliveness of the aware presence, we recognize, oh, it's only actually known in the aliveness of consciousness. And that's what we recognize as our nervous system, right? So we get to open. This is how refinement happens naturally in consciousness. This is the beauty of what we are and what we are opening to, right? So where you can feel the resonant truth of what's being spoken, and where, let's say, it seems to make sense, and there's a sense of, oh yeah, now that isn't the mind that's getting it, even though the mind might think it is. It's the intelligence of your consciousness intelligently recognizing its own mechanistic functioning. So where there's recognition and the sense of, oh yeah, that makes sense, it's actually also happening in consciousness. Consciousness is opening to a more subtle, intelligent perception of its own mechanics. It's recognizing, oh, this is how it works, right? This is how this works. So we can't understand that with the mind, can only open to the resonant remembering and cognizing aliveness of the field. And this is called the ritam, right? It's the nectarine aliveness of the field, the ritam. It's where consciousness knows itself. It's like a pure knowledge field. And the ritam, that pure knowing knowledge where it just knows itself, where it flows in the knowing of itself, it creates an amrit, like a nectarine blissful flow within itself, right? Flowing in the knowing of itself and creating a bliss which is very nourishing, very deeply nourishing. So this is where we speak of the aliveness of the field being where the nourishment is. So now if we were able to just drop into the aliveness and just stay here, nourishing, 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 nourishing aliveness, we might just completely forget about the story of my life and be just like Ramana and just fall deeper and deeper in to a samadhi, right? Now the chances are that the mind's going to pop up and say, oh, you've got to go and make a phone call. Oh, you've got to, oh, right? Because it's the time that we're living and it's the nature of these lives, right? So the beauty is, yes, we can be together. We can gather in the being and we can feel that nourishment and how supportive it is to be together and to feel that deep nourishment of being in the field of being. Before you know it, a morning and an evening sit, suddenly it's like, should we sit all day? Oh, should we sit every day? Right? Right? This is likely what happened very quickly for Ramana. Just, oh, this is so good. This is so good. So we recognize the nourishment of being the being and falling into the being together. And we say it doesn't matter where we are in the worldly sense, because you're opening to your nervous system, you're opening to the awake field, and opening to the awake field and the sense of opening together, there's like an enlivenment that happens because there's a focus of being the being, and there's an enlivenment that happens when the focus is allowing that nourishing flow to flow, right? So it's all about being. It's all about the presence. Now, the only instruction that's worth anything is so simple that the mind says, no, it's just about presence. Just be present. Just be with the aliveness. Just be still and watch. Now, there's got to be more to it than that. I'm going to get a book. I'm going to find out, right? I'm gonna do some research. I'm gonna Google it. I'm gonna Google it, and you're gonna find all kinds of beings that are gonna tell you do all of these practices, spend the next 20 years mastering this. And what's going to happen is 20 years later, you're going to say, oh, it was all about the presence. It's all about the presence. But the great glory is it doesn't matter, because the moment that it lands is so glorious. It's so glorious that who cares about those 20 years? Who cares, right? It's all about now. It's all about now. And when the recognition that it's all about now lands, it's all about now, right? You're so intimate and present with your own presence that suddenly you're falling into yourself, you're falling in. And so every time something lands in direct experience as a truth, recognize how potent it is. Now, it's not potent because of anyone else. It's potent because it's landed in your direct experience and it's so clear and alive. Now, what generally happens is that it's so potent and alive that we want to share it with our companions. And that's okay. It's okay to share it with our companions, because speaking about it can really help stabilize openings and clear seeings. It can really help stabilize, right, what is being recognized. So there's this beauty, how as we all open and deepen, we can support and gather in this beauty, that's for sure. But nothing is more potent than the recognition in your own nervous system of a subtly finer frequency. And it's everything to notice the subtlety. And yes, we love in our human experience to say, oh, I just saw that I was moving in this protective pattern, and when I saw it, something opened. It's part of the play that we qualify it or an insight comes. It's okay, but don't overlook the importance of the subtlety that's happening in the nervous system, which is where the peace and the refinement is, because that's consciousness. And that's why everything starts to feel more peaceful and calm as we open to the being. We start to feel just more aligned with nature, more clear, and we're more pulled into the silence, the stillness. Follow the natural pull to be in the silence, in the stillness. Recognize that the pull is to be in the peace of the being. The pull is to be with yourself and to be confirming in the being, this is good. This is good. Good. Yes. This feels true. This feels peaceful and nourishing. And there's such a pull to sit more, particularly in the earlier stages. But, you know, at different stages, there will be pulls. Sometimes there'll be more of a momentum to seemingly be a little bit more embodied and outward. And then the pull will come to just fall deeper, deeper, deeper in. But it's always about the nervous system. Even if the pull to be more embodied and seemingly worldly, it's because it's about integrating and being with your nervous system as life is living itself, and recognizing, oh, life is living itself like this. And it's noticing the differences of how life is lived, how the experience is more subtle and refined. It's more easeful, right? It's all about noticing the subtleties. For sure it is. But it's not so much about the story of the subtleties. It's about the resonance, the freedom, the beauty, and the flow of grace that is recognized in the aliveness. So all these words, and yet such a silence, such an aliveness of the presence of now. Notice the aliveness, because all of these words are just the intelligence of the silent field. They're not information. They're not more worldly knowledge. All these words are silent intelligence. All these words are just silent, intelligent consciousness enlivening itself, speaking to itself in the magical coded way that it speaks to itself in order to free itself and bring itself to a deeper and more subtle, refined remembering of itself. It's about the resonance, the stillness, the silence, the presence of being, and where the recognition is alive. The resonance, the frequency, and being so subtly awake to the aliveness, the subtle awakeness to the aliveness is to be subtly perceiving your own consciousness as consciousness, consciousness conscious of itself, subtly perceiving itself, and then resonating at the finer frequency of recognition and knowing, and resonating at the frequency of pure consciousness, pure being. Recognize here, there's awareness, but there's no story. There's just being. There's just the open field. Awareness can be aware of moving, changing patterns, but here in the fine frequency, such a freedom, such an openness, such an aliveness of just life, being alive and awake to itself. And here you are, connected into the source of all. Before the appearance of the world, here is the source, aliveness, which is the alive, awake flow of life. Now, of course, we hang out here long enough, we start to see how this intelligence creates the appearance, because all of the mechanics are here ready to reveal themselves. But we have to stay present in the aliveness for the subtle perception to reveal all of the ways that it works, to reveal all of its functioning. But of course, that's not information. It's the knowing of consciousness, and the knowing of consciousness, knowing itself. It knows itself consciously, and it knows itself consciously, and it opens to finer and finer frequencies until the frequency is fine enough that it says, this is God. This is divine. And when the subtlety of the frequency says, this is God, this is divine, this is Mother, it's the divine recognizing itself in your nervous system, right? So it's the divine recognizing itself in your nervous system and resonating, and now starting to refine itself even more. Because once the divine can be recognized in the nervous system, the divine wants to take up resonance of that nervous system that has the capacity to bring the divine to the surface of life. So there's a refinement that happens in the nervous system until the divine can be recognized at a fine enough frequency, and then a depth of refinement to refine the nervous system to be able to bring that resonance to the surface of life. And of course, the intelligence knows how. Now, sometimes, of course, let's say the recognition of the divine, it can be a small recognition of the divine. It can be a big recognition of the divine. It can be a more subtle recognition of the sacredness, of the holiness. It's just the nervous system, as it refines, it starts to feel frequencies, flows of its own intelligence that are more subtle. And then it recognizes holiness, sacredness, and the words don't really matter, they're flavors. And so again, just as when we access a divine being, let's use here the example of maybe Anandamayi Ma, that if we feel a resonance with such a being, and we feel like a connection, the subtle flows that are awakening are not her, because that's worldly experience. We're opening to the celestial, subtle, more divine flows of our own system, right? But that seemingly external, because it's timeless, right? Her presence is timeless. Her holiness, her divinity is timeless. Those flows exist. And as we can open to those flows, the flows are the timeless flows of the holiness, the celestial, the fineness of pure divinity, right? So that is why when we feel resonances, the same is true of maybe like Rumi poetry, or, there's different ways that these flows get enlivened. But when we really open to like a sense of where we find ourselves saying, this is God. And then we imagine, we can't imagine, because if we're saying that, if this is being recognized, it's happening in God, it's happening in the nervous system that is opening to these fine flows, because the mind would never say, oh, this is God, I am God, because the mind is fully committed to being unworthy of divinity, right? So we're very far away from all that at the moment. So we won't go more into that. But where there's this recognition, again, it's not to be looking to arrive or land in some kind of state, but just to open in the recognition. This feels so holy. This feels like Ma. This feels like God. Like, we don't have to explore with the mind of, well, what are you talking about? You just revel in the fine resonance, because as we have just spoken, it's God recognizing God. It's God alive as God in your nervous system. It's not you as a person recognizing God. It's God. It's just the aliveness of that knowing subtly coming into the nervous system. And so we just allow any of these kind of holy openings or recognitions to just nourish a deeper and deeper settling of the divine flows, because the divine flows are these very, very surrendered and fine resonances of consciousness. And they just come in to purify and purify. But essentially, all that's known is your nervous system. All that's known is your consciousness. And it's just to allow consciousness to unfold intelligently within itself. And yes, at some point, it unfolds so fully to itself that it drops into finer frequencies of itself. And yet, we do not want to get stuck labeling any of this. We just want to be free. Be free. Just be free and allow the flows and the resonances where there's a sense of truth just to flow, just to flow, just to flow. It's all about the presence, here now, the aliveness, the stillness, the silence, the peace, the beauty of just being here, just like this. Mm. Mm. So to feel the resonance of being, we could say the sense of your nervous system is a unique flow, but it is absolutely always one in consciousness as consciousness with the one pure consciousness. So the more that we come to the sense of the presence, we open out of the imagined idea of separation, and we open to the whole awake field of consciousness, where the knowing is in the resonance, the recognition, the felt sense of being, simply being awake and aware. We could say maybe awareness, aware of itself, as we rest here, just awake and aware of the presence that's here, your own presence. There's a falling into the light that is before the presence, in a way animating the presence, animating the light of awareness, the light of pure awareness that's aware as the witness, but the light of awareness reminds us that we are the awake awareness, just pure awake awareness, just this shining light, knowing itself, awake and aware of itself. The confirmation is in the felt sense, where the recognition just is a knowing, an alive recognition that just knows that you are not limited by anything. You're not limited by thought or story, mind, body. You are unlimited, utterly free, freedom.